Welcome to Biden Brief. The content of the briefing includes opinion, why Democrats shouldn't despair over concerning new polls about Biden. Blinken meets with Palestinian and Iraqi leaders in bid to contain Gaza war. Ukraine latest, Zelensky says invited Trump to Ukraine. Monday's time schedule. How China can reassure nervous foreign investors before it's too late. Opinion, why Democrats shouldn't despair over concerning new polls about Biden. CNN. A New York Times poll shows that President Joe Biden is trailing Donald Trump in several key battleground states, and has lost support among Black and Hispanic voters and voters under 30. However, the poll also suggests that Biden can reassemble his winning coalition, and highlights two issues where Biden is more trusted than Trump: abortion and the handling of democracy. Blinken meets with Palestinian and Iraqi leaders in bid to contain Gaza war. New York Times. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited both the West Bank and Iraq yesterday, in an effort to reassure Palestinian leaders that the U.S. is committed to minimizing harm to civilians under fire in the Gaza Strip. He also warned Iran not to involve themselves in the conflict. Blinken confirmed that it was very important to send a very clear message to anyone who might seek to take advantage of the conflict in Gaza to threaten our personnel here or anywhere else in the region: don't do it. In the West Bank, he spoke to Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas about U.S. efforts to get Israeli leaders to minimize civilian harm in Gaza. In Iraq, Blinken met with Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, in what appeared to be a show of support. The trip is part of the Biden administration's efforts to deter Iran and its proxies from becoming involved in the Gaza conflict. Ukraine latest, Zelensky says invited Trump to Ukraine. Nikkei Asia. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called on the U.S. to provide more funding to help Ukraine counter Russia's invasion. In an interview with NBC's Meet the Press, Zelensky invited former U.S. President Donald Trump to visit Ukraine and witness the scale of the conflict for himself. Trump, who is seeking re-election in 2024 and has been critical of U.S. support for Kyiv, has claimed he could end the war in 24 hours if re-elected. Zelensky responded by saying, "If he can come here, I will need 24 minutes to explain to President Trump that he can't manage this war." Zelensky also emphasized that Trump can't bring peace because of Putin. Monday's time schedule. Associated Press. This article provides a schedule of various sporting events taking place on November 6, including NBA, NFL, NHL, and MLS games. The article lists the teams and the times at which each game will occur. How China can reassure nervous foreign investors before it's too late. South China Morning Post. Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Joe Biden are expected to meet in San Francisco later this month, with the Taiwan issue likely to top the agenda. However, the management of the securitization of the U.S.-China economic relationship is also a priority. Beijing has accused Washington of exaggerating concerns over the security implications of their economic ties, but China has also responded by securitizing U.S.-related trade and investment issues. The Chinese government needs to review its policies in order to find a better balance between security and development to reassure investors at home and abroad. Foreign investor sentiment towards China has soured, with some describing the country as uninvestable. China must take this complaint seriously and take substantive steps to reassure investors before they leave for good. This includes addressing its Catch a Spy campaign, which is causing unnecessary panic, and reviewing its policy of exit bans, which prevent overseas businessmen from leaving China due to business disputes. U.S. officials fear American guns ordered by Israel could fuel West Bank violence. New York Times. The U.S. government is scrutinizing an Israeli government request for 24,000 assault rifles, worth $34 million, due to concerns that the weapons might be used by Israeli settlers and civilian militias in the West Bank. The U.S. State Department must approve the sale, which has already been informally notified to congressional committees. Israeli officials have indicated that the rifles could be given to civilians, in addition to the National Police Force. The Israeli police have pledged to supply thousands of weapons to Israeli civilians in towns and cities, including Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Israel's Minister for National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, has promised to provide guns to settlements. U.S. officials have expressed concern that the violence by settler extremists will be exacerbated by the distribution of weapons. The U.S. regularly sells a range of weapons to Israel, and President Biden has requested an additional $14 billion of military aid for Israel. Monday briefing, Antony Blinken visits the Middle East. New York Times. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Baghdad yesterday in an unannounced trip. The visit aimed to show support for the Iraqi Prime Minister, Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, and to send a message to Iran about the Biden administration's commitment to defending its personnel. Blinken's visit also aimed to contain the fallout from Israel's recent war against Hamas and to deter Iran and its proxies from entering the conflict. Blinken has sent messages to Iran and Hezbollah through regional partners that the U.S. would be prepared to intervene militarily against them if they launched attacks against Israel. Earlier in the day, Blinken visited the Israeli-occupied West Bank to meet with Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the internationally backed Palestinian Authority, to discuss efforts to restore calm in the region. The Gaza war has deepened Joe Biden's Iran nightmare. Economist. The recent conflict between Israel and Hamas has brought to the forefront a wider rivalry between Israel and Iran. Iran, through its proxies, has threatened American interests and celebrated the attacks by Hamas, potentially acting with the cooperation of Russia and China. This raises questions about President Joe Biden's ability to refashion a strategy for the Middle East. Iran has been raising tensions without provoking an all-out confrontation, engaging in attacks against Israel and the U.S. military in the region. Iran is now seeking to maximize the diplomatic dividend from the conflict, hoping to increase its influence and spoil American-backed plans for closer ties between the U.S., Israel, and the Gulf states. However, it may be too soon for Iran to celebrate, as there is a potential shift in U.S. policy towards Iran underway. The Biden administration had attempted to pursue low-key diplomacy, but this strategy is no longer sustainable. Iran's cooperation with Russia and closer economic ties with China make the situation more complex. The U.S. will likely impose further sanctions, but military action against Iran would be a significant gamble. Diplomacy may be the only viable option, but reaching a deal between the U.S. and Iran seems increasingly difficult. China-U.S. rivalry takes center stage as Solomon Islands deepens ties with Beijing. The Guardian. Leaders from the Pacific Islands Forum, PIF, an 18-member grouping of 16 Pacific nations, including Australia and New Zealand, plus 2 French territories, are meeting in the Cook Islands to discuss the climate crisis and ongoing U.S.-China rivalry. Delegates will debate whether to support Australia's bid to co-host the 2026 UN Climate Conference, with former Tuvalu Prime Minister Nele Sopoaga calling for PIF leaders to use the event to call on Australia to stop approving coal and gas projects. Alaska senators support Israel and Ukraine military aid package amid opposition from some Republicans. Yahoo! Alaska U.S. Senators Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan say they support additional military aid for both Israel and Ukraine, as support for Ukraine funding wanes among some of their Republican colleagues. The U.S. House passed a Republican-backed bill on Thursday with more than $14 billion in supplemental funding for Israel's war with Hamas, but without funding for Ukraine, despite requests from President Joe Biden to keep funding for Israel and Ukraine combined in a single package. All but 12 House Democrats voted against the House bill, including Alaska Representative Mary Peltola, citing a provision added to the bill by Republicans that would reduce funding for the Internal Revenue Service. CIA director visits Israel and the Middle East amid Israel-Hamas war. New York Times. CIA Director William J. Burns has arrived in Israel for discussions with leaders and intelligence officials. He will also be traveling to other Middle Eastern countries to discuss the situation in Gaza, ongoing hostage negotiations, and the importance of deterring the war with Hamas from widening. The U.S. is pushing Israel to pursue a more targeted approach to attacking Hamas, allow pauses in the fighting for aid to enter Gaza, and do more to avoid civilian casualties. The U.S. is also looking to expand its intelligence sharing with Israel, providing information that could be useful about hostage locations or any follow-on attacks by Hamas. Trump leads in 2024 polls as fears over war and economy hurt Biden. Financial Times. Two polls conducted by the New York Times/Siena and CBS News show that U.S. President Joe Biden is trailing behind former President Donald Trump in key battleground states for the 2024 election. The polls indicate that concerns over the economy and splits within the Democratic Party over the Israel-Hamas conflict are negatively impacting Biden's re-election prospects. The surveys reveal that voters trust Trump more than Biden on the economy, and that Biden has failed to win over Democrats in the same way Trump has convinced Republicans. The Israel-Hamas war has further fractured the Democratic Party, with younger voters and people of color breaking with the president. What the GOP candidates have said about the Israel-Hamas conflict. The Independent. The third GOP debate is set to take place on Wednesday, November 8 in Miami. Candidates will have more time to give thoughtful answers because there are fewer participants due to stricter criteria set by the Republican National Committee, RNC. So far, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, and former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie have all met the new criteria. Former President Donald Trump has technically qualified, but has refused to sign a pledge supporting the eventual RNC candidate, and has opted out of participating in the debates. Fetterman accuses Gavin Newsom of running shadow presidential campaign. The Independent. Internal feuding among Democrats is increasing as Joe Biden's potential weakness as a presidential candidate grows. Congressman Dean Phillips recently announced that he would challenge Biden for the Democratic nomination, and Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman openly criticized California Governor Gavin Newsom, another potential 2024 contender. Fetterman's remarks came after new polling indicated that Biden's chances of re-election are weaker than ever. Newsom has denied allegations of running a shadow campaign, and has stated that he would not run if Biden were to step aside. Democrats have work cut out as Biden trails Trump in 5 swing states, says Senator. The Guardian. Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal said on Sunday that the party has its work cut out for us in response to new polling that shows President Joe Biden trailing Donald Trump in 5 of 6 swing states. The survey by the New York Times and Siena College of Voters in 6 battleground states was released with 365 days to go until the 2024 presidential election. Biden is ahead in Wisconsin, but Trump topped the survey in Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. Axelrod suggests Biden drop out of 2024 presidential race. Yahoo! David Axelrod, a former senior advisor to President Obama, is suggesting that President Biden might want to consider dropping out of the 2024 presidential race. Axelrod points to a New York Times/Siena College poll that shows President Biden trailing former President Trump in 5 out of 6 battleground states. Axelrod said Biden's age is his biggest liability, and something he cannot change. If President Biden runs for re-election in 2024, he will be 86 at the end of his second term. U.S. Senator calls for end to Israeli strikes and killing of innocent civilians. The Guardian. U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders has called for an immediate end to Israeli bombing in Gaza, and an end to the killing of innocent civilians. While Sanders condemned the Hamas attack on Israel, he argued that Israel does not have the right to kill thousands of innocent men, women, and children who had nothing to do with the attack. Sanders also called for an end to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, stating that there is not enough food, water, medicine, or fuel. He has been influential on the progressive left of U.S. politics at a time of deepening divisions over the response to the war. U.S. senators call on Israel to shift Gaza tactics as deaths rise. Yahoo! Senior U.S. senators have expressed concern about civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip, increasing scrutiny of Israel's military response to last month's attack by Hamas. The stance echoes growing unease among progressives and some mainstream Democrats about Israel's campaign to eliminate the threat from Hamas. Prominent progressive Democrats say the U.S. isn't doing enough to protect Palestinian civilians. Meanwhile, a group of House Republicans object to coupling aid to Israel with assistance to Ukraine. The Biden administration has proposed a pause to allow time to free Hamas-held hostages in Gaza, but stops short of a ceasefire sought by Arab countries. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds will endorse Florida Governor Ron DeSantis for president, AP sources say. Associated Press. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds plans to endorse Ron DeSantis for president, giving the Florida governor's 2024 campaign a boost as he struggles to show progress against Donald Trump in the Republican primary. Reynolds is well liked within the GOP and will break with long-standing Iowa tradition to endorse DeSantis. The people familiar with the matter spoke to the Associated Press on condition of anonymity before a Monday rally in Des Moines where Reynolds is expected to announce her endorsement. Biden trails Trump in states likely to decide 2024 U.S. election, polls show. Yahoo! Democratic President Joe Biden trails Republican frontrunner Donald Trump in 5 of the 6 most important battleground states exactly a year before the U.S. election as Americans express doubts about Biden's age and dissatisfaction toward his handling of the economy, polls released on Sunday showed. Dear viewers, I hope you're all doing well in the 6-degree world. It's your friendly neighborhood 6 doctor here, bringing you the latest news from across the dimensions. Let's dive right into it. First up, we have some interesting news for the Democrats. A recent poll shows that President Joe Biden is trailing behind Donald Trump in key battleground states. But don't despair just yet, folks. The poll also suggests that Biden can still reassemble his winning coalition. It highlights 2 issues where Biden is more trusted than Trump: abortion and the handling of democracy. So there's still hope for the Democrats. In other news, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been busy meeting with Palestinian and Iraqi leaders. He's trying to contain the Gaza war and reassure Palestinian leaders that the U.S. is committed to minimizing harm to civilians. Blinken also warned Iran not to involve themselves in the conflict. It looks like the Biden administration is making efforts to deter Iran and its proxies from becoming involved in the Gaza conflict. Moving on to Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky has called on the U.S. for more funding to counter Russia's invasion. In an interview, Zelensky even invited former President Donald Trump to visit Ukraine and witness the scale of the conflict. Zelensky seems confident that he can convince Trump that he can't manage this war in just 24 hours. It's an interesting proposal, to say the least. Now, let's talk about sports. The schedule for Monday's sporting events is out, and it's packed with NBA, NFL, NHL, and MLS games. So get your snacks ready and enjoy the games. Moving on to China, President Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden are expected to meet later this month to discuss the Taiwan issue. But there's another important issue that needs to be addressed: the securitization of the U.S.-China economic relationship. China needs to find a better balance between security and development to reassure investors. Foreign investor sentiment towards China has soured, and some are even calling the country uninvestable. China needs to take this complaint seriously and make some changes before investors leave for good. In some concerning news, the U.S. government is scrutinizing an Israeli government request for 24,000 assault rifles. There are concerns that these weapons might be used by Israeli settlers and civilian militias in the West Bank. The U.S. State Department must approve the sale, and there are worries that the violence by settler extremists will be exacerbated by the distribution of weapons. It's a tense situation that needs to be closely monitored. And finally, let's talk about the 2024 presidential race. It seems like President Biden is facing some challenges in the polls. He's trailing behind former President Trump in key battleground states. Concerns over the economy and splits within the Democratic Party over the Israel-Hamas conflict are negatively impacting Biden's re-election prospects. It's definitely something the Democrats need to address. Well, that's all the news for today, folks. Remember, these are just snapshots of what's happening in the 6-degree world. There's always more to the story, and I encourage you all to do your own research and form your own opinions. Now, it's time for your thoughts. What do you think about these news stories? Do you have any questions or comments? Let's hear them. Stay curious, stay informed, and I'll see you next time. Yours in the 6-degree world. The 6th Doctor. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6 Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6 Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6 team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6 Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dubrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6 Brief via email.